What if the smallest steps were the ones that changed everything? In a quiet garden where nothing seemed to grow, time itself waited, patient, silent, unmoving. Days passed, seasons turned, yet the soil stayed bare. Most people would have given up, saying, "It's hopeless. Nothing will ever bloom here." And perhaps that's what makes us human. We crave results so much that we forget how miracles are born, slowly, unseen, one drop at a time. We measure life by outcomes, not by effort. We fear beginnings because they look too small to matter. But maybe change begins exactly there, in the smallest of beginnings, in the quiet moments no one notices, because sometimes what looks like nothing at all is simply growth, taking its time. This is the story of a gardener who learned that growth is never sudden. It's earned, one small step at a time. Elias Turner was 48 years old. He lived on the edge of a small town called Maple Grove, where the fields stretched farther than the eye could see. Most mornings began the same. He would boil a pot of tea, wrap his hands around the warm cup, and step into his garden. The soil was dry, the air smelled faintly of earth and dew, and the sun came slow, soft and golden. Elias had been a gardener all his life, not a famous one, not a rich one, just a man who planted, trimmed, and hoped. But there was something restless about him. If a sprout didn't appear in a few days, he would sigh, dig it up, and start again. He believed that if something wasn't perfect, it wasn't worth doing at all. To him, growth had to be visible, results immediate. Patience felt like an excuse for failure. His small garden reflected that truth. Rows of half-grown plants, some abandoned halfway through the season. Neighbors liked him, but they said Elias never stayed long enough to see beauty unfold. Still, every morning, he showed up. Because deep down, even impatience hides a quiet hope. Then, one early spring morning, a letter arrived from the Maple Grove Town Hall. They wanted Elias to take care of the city's new garden by the courthouse, a contract bigger than anything he'd had before. He read the letter twice, heart pounding like rain on dry soil. Maybe this was his chance to prove himself, to make something that finally grew and stayed. He folded the letter, looked out at his fading garden, and whispered to himself, "This time, I'll get it right." Summer came early that year. The rain forgot Maple Grove. Weeks passed, and the soil turned hard and pale. Cracks split through the ground like veins of exhaustion. Elias stood in the courthouse garden, staring at the wilted leaves. He carried water in old metal cans, again and again, but it was never enough. The sun burned too fiercely, and every drop vanished before it could touch the roots. At first, he told himself it would pass. But each morning, more plants bent, more petals fell. Children stopped visiting, the benches grew empty. People began to whisper, soft but sharp. "They hired the wrong man," someone said near the fence. Another muttered, "The garden's dying, just like the old gardener's patience." Elias heard them all. He tried harder. He stayed longer, even when the heat turned the air into glass. But the garden refused him, and one afternoon, when the last sapling in the center, a young oak he'd planted with such pride, finally withered to brown, something inside him cracked too. He dropped the watering can, watched it roll across the dust. Then he sat on the edge of the dry fountain, hands trembling. "All these years," he whispered, "and I still fail at growing life." The wind carried his words away, but the emptiness stayed. He looked around at what was once a promise, now a graveyard of color. His contract was canceled the next week. Town said it wasn't personal, just bad timing. But to Elias, it felt like a verdict. He stopped showing up. The tools rusted, the soil hardened again, as if erasing every trace of his touch. Sometimes we confuse speed with progress, but nothing that matters ever grows overnight. Elias had spent his life chasing proof instead of patience. trying to make beauty obey his timeline. Now, all he had left was silence. One evening, as the sun bled orange across the horizon, he walked to the garden gate. The oak stood there, dry, brittle, but still upright, as if refusing to fall. He ran a hand along its trunk, rough and lifeless. Then, without a word, he locked the gate. The sound of the latch echoed softly through the empty yard, a small sound that felt like an ending. And for the first time in many years, Elias did not look back. Autumn crept quietly into Maple Grove. Leaves fell like soft reminders of what used to be alive. Elias no longer tended to the soil. The garden behind his cottage lay buried beneath a blanket of brown and gold. He kept the windows closed now. The tools stayed untouched in the corner, rust gathering on their edges. Days blurred together. He would sit by the small kitchen window, watching the rain trace lines down the glass. The clock above the stove had stopped at 5:47 weeks ago. He never wound it again. It was easier that way. When time stopped, so did the ache of trying. Sometimes, he whispered to himself, maybe I'm not made to grow anything anymore. The words felt heavy, but honest. He had spent a lifetime reaching for beauty, and now he couldn't even lift a shovel. The town moved on without him. The courthouse garden was taken over by someone new, someone younger, faster. From his window, Elias could see the faint color of flowers returning. He wanted to feel something about it. Anger, pride, regret. But mostly, he felt nothing at all. Then one cold morning, as he stepped outside to fetch the mail, he noticed a small envelope resting on the porch. No return name, just 2 words, written in a child's uneven handwriting. For your next garden. Inside was a single seed. Tiny, ordinary. He held it in his palm, unsure whether to laugh or sigh. For days, it sat on his kitchen table beside the cold cup of tea he never finished. Every morning, the light would fall across it, catching its smooth shape. He would glance at it, then look away. Some days, he thought of throwing it out. Other days, he simply stared, wondering who had sent it and why. What difference could one seed make? He murmured one evening, turning it gently between his fingers. Outside, the rain kept falling, soft and steady, and though he didn't notice it yet, somewhere deep in him, something began to loosen, like soil that had long been waiting for a reason to breathe again. The next morning, the rain had stopped. The air smelled of wet earth and quiet beginnings. Elias stood by the window, staring at the little seed still resting on the table. For reasons he couldn't explain, he picked it up. It felt warm against his palm, almost alive. He stepped outside. The garden was still gray, but the ground was soft from last night's rain. He found a small patch near the old oak stump, the same spot where he used to dream of growing something beautiful. With slow, uncertain hands, he dug a shallow hole. Then he placed the seed inside, covered it with soil, and whispered, "There you go." Across the fence, Mrs. Lorraine was tending her roses. She was in her 70s, her back slightly bent, her knees stiff with pain. Yet, every morning, without fail, she was there, watering, pruning, humming softly to her flowers. She looked up and smiled. "Morning, Elias," she said. "Planning something new?" He hesitated. "Just a seed someone left for me, Mrs." Lorraine nodded, resting on her cane. "Gardens don't grow in a day," she said gently. "They grow because someone stays long enough to see them bloom." Her voice lingered in the cool air like sunlight breaking through clouds. Elias looked at her. This woman who kept showing up, even when her hands shook. Something in her words loosened the heaviness he'd carried for too long. He didn't say a word. But as she turned back to her roses, he felt tears slide down his face. Quiet, like rain returning to the soil. That evening, He brought out a small watering can and poured water over the spot where the seed slept. The next morning, he did it again, and again the day after. No one noticed, but that didn't matter. It wasn't about growing a garden anymore. It was about remembering how to care. Because healing begins not when you succeed, but when you care again. The next few weeks came quietly. No grand plans, no bold promises, just mornings that began a little earlier, and hands that remembered how to work again. Elias started with the smallest corner of his yard. He cleared the weeds, one root at a time. He loosened the soil, spread the dry leaves into compost, and marked the little patch where the seed was buried. Then, every morning, he watered it. Not much, just enough to keep the earth damp. He didn't expect anything. He just wanted to keep showing up. Days passed. The sky shifted from gray to blue. And one morning, he saw it. A hint of green pushing through the soil. It was small, almost invisible, but alive. He bent closer and smiled. For the first time in months, he felt something bloom inside him, too. From that day on, Elias began keeping notes. He scribbled small observations on a piece of paper pinned near the window. New sprout, 2 leaves. Soil still dry, add water earlier. Sunlight better after 7. They were tiny details, but they made him feel connected again. To life, to rhythm, to time. The sound of the clock above the stove returned. One evening, as he sat sipping tea, he heard it tick again. 5:47. The same moment it had stopped. Now, it began to move. And in that gentle rhythm, Elias realized something profound. Progress is quiet before it's seen. He didn't chase results anymore. He let things unfold. Some days, he sat beside the small sprout and just watched it breathe under the sun. Other days, he walked to the courthouse garden, the one he had lost. The gates were still open, though no one cared for it much. The flowers there were fading again, so he brought his watering can and began to tend them too. At first, people watched from a distance. A few children followed, curious. One of them, a boy named Henry, asked, "Why do you work on a garden that isn't yours anymore?" Elias smiled, brushing soil from his hands. "It's okay if it takes time," he said softly. "Things don't need to be yours to deserve care." Soon, the children began helping him, carrying water, pulling weeds, planting tiny buds. He taught them what he'd forgotten to teach himself. "That's enough water," he'd say. "Don't rush it. Roots grow slow, but strong." Each day brought a small miracle. A bud here, a butterfly there. The mornings grew brighter, the air smelled of green, and the once quiet garden began to hum again, with bees, laughter, and life. Elias started to understand patience in a new way. Patience isn't the lack of action. It's the presence of trust. He realized that caring for something rushed didn't always mean controlling it. It meant staying long enough to see it thrive. "Every drop of water counts," he would tell the children, "even the ones that fall on dry ground. Because every act of kindness plants something, whether or not you see it bloom." By late spring, Maple Grove's public garden was alive again. Tulips stretched toward the sun. Lavender brushed softly in the wind. The small oak, once thought dead, had sprouted a single new branch. It stood proud and stubborn, like a reminder that resilience doesn't shout, it whispers. Villagers began returning. They sat on the benches again, smiled at the colors, took pictures with their children. No one asked who had brought the garden back, but they all knew. One afternoon, Mrs. Lorraine walked by with her cane, stopping beside Elias. "It's beautiful," she said. He looked at her, eyes warm and calm. "Not perfect," he answered, "but alive." When evening came, Elias lingered by the gate. The light was soft, golden, the kind of light that forgives everything it touches. He glanced around at the blossoms, at the laughter echoing through the paths, at the small oak that had refused to die. And he whispered to himself, almost as if confessing a secret, All it took was staying. In the months that followed, the garden became more than just a place of color and life. It became a mirror, a quiet teacher of truths that Elias had forgotten. He often thought about what the garden had taught him. The lessons were simple, but they ran deep, like roots beneath the soil. Lesson 1. Start small, but start. Growth never begins with perfection. It begins with a single act, a seed, a word, a step forward. Elias used to wait for the right time, the right plan, the right feeling. But gardens do not wait. They grow when you begin, not when you are ready. Lesson 2. Perfection kills progress. Nature rewards those who nurture, not those who rush. Elias once believed that if something wasn't flawless, it wasn't worth doing. But now he understood flowers don't bloom because they are perfect. They bloom because someone keeps watering them anyway. Lesson 3. Patience is a quiet form of courage. It takes bravery to keep caring when results come slowly. The world celebrates speed and success, but patience is the art of trust. To wait without giving up, that's strength. Lesson 4. Every day you show up, something unseen grows. Even when nothing seems to change, life is at work beneath the surface. Roots spread where no one can see. Dreams strengthen in silence. Elias learned that growth is not always visible, but it is always happening. Lesson 5. The biggest gardens are made of countless tiny steps. Each drop of water, each pull of a weed, each quiet morning mattered. He realized it wasn't one grand gesture that revived the garden. It was persistence, repeated in small doses of hope. Lesson 6. Failure isn't the end. It's soil for wisdom. Every mistake, every wilted flower, every drought had taught him something new. Failure doesn't destroy you. It prepares you. It loosens the soil so that new roots can find their way. Lesson 7. What you water daily becomes your life. Attention is nourishment. Whatever you care for, good or bad, will grow. If you water doubt, it multiplies. If you water kindness, it blossoms. Your life becomes what you tend to each day. Elias wrote these truths in his notebook, not for others to read, but to remember. When he looked around at the garden, now full of color and calm, he smiled softly. He finally understood that the garden had never been about plants. It had been about him, about the slow rebuilding of a man who once gave up too soon. Because small steps don't just grow gardens, they grow people. And in that quiet truth, Elias found peace, not in the perfection of the world around him, but in the steady rhythm of care, one small step at a time. Morning light spilled across the wooden porch of the small cottage in Maple Grove. Elias sat quietly by the steps, his hands resting on his knees, the scent of damp earth filling the air. In front of him, the garden stretched wide and alive. Tulips swaying, bees humming, sunlight brushing through the leaves. He reached out and touched a single flower, its petals soft, trembling slightly in the breeze. A faint smile crossed his face, not one of triumph, but of peace. In some way, we are all gardeners, waiting for our own seeds to bloom. Some seeds take weeks, some take years, but growth doesn't rush. It unfolds when it's ready, and only if we keep showing up. Elias had learned that lesson the long way. He no longer chased perfection. He simply cared. And that made all the difference. Maybe that's what life is. Not about doing everything at once, not about grand gestures or flawless timing, but about choosing one small thing and tending to it day after day. You don't have to do everything today. Just take one small step. The rest will follow. The camera fades on Elias, still sitting by the door, sunlight warming his face. The garden hums softly, alive, breathing, whole. If this story touched you, share it. Someone out there needs this reminder today.